Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Neglected News. I know it's been a while since I put up a podcast. I did do, for those of you who saw me on Periscope, using Twitter at news_neglected, or for those of you who saw my YouTube video titled, What is Wrong with California, by Neglected News with Aaron Jenkins, then y'all will have heard me talk a little bit about California and what's going on over there. It's just absolutely ridiculous. But I do, for those of you that haven't heard it, I'll go ahead and just give you the quick highlights. We talked about several different bills. The oldest, starting with the oldest and moving forward into the future, we have Senate Bill 1322 that was signed into law September of 2016. And what it did was it decriminalized childhood prostitution. And for those of you who have heard me explain this before, the difference in something being criminalized and decriminalized does not change whether or not it is legal. The only thing that it means is that just as well as speeding above a posted speed limit is technically illegal according to the statute, it is not bad enough to send you to jail. They will not actually arrest you for it, except under very extreme circumstances like reckless endangerment, in which you're doing, in the state of Texas where I'm at, I believe it's anything above 20 miles an hour above the posted speed limit. But that's just a quick example. So it's not that they made it legal, but whereas Senate Bill 1322 took childhood prostitution from a felony charge to a misdemeanor, well, that did not do anything to stop childhood prostitution. And as a matter of fact, it just made it, give it the opportunity to get worse, because if you don't have these limits and controls on things like prostitution, especially of a minor, then what you're doing is you're taking that minor who most of the time is forced into these situations where they've either literally been drugged up to the point where they're either incoherent or they have become on such an addiction basis that they are a slave to the drug and being manipulated by a provider, a user of that individual. And these are the pimps. These are also the, quote, Johns that benefit from the so-called services of said poor young girls. And boys, the world is not inclusive to just one. But they lessened how important it was to the community. And stated, the LA Times even came out and said that, this was a good thing. This was going to take away the bad mark it gave, young girls for something that they didn't want to be a part of. Okay, well, that just kind of pretty much solidified everything that I just said. So to tell me that by not removing a child or by not removing the harsher penalty for the, quote, Johns that benefit from the services. However, again, adult prostitution in California is more prosecuted at a higher degree than now childhood prostitution. And when you've done that, it is a direct attack on our children. I really wish people in California would see that, stand up to it, state that Senate Bill 1322 needs to be revoked, rescinded, and gone, because it is a terrible law. Another one that we looked at was Senate Bill 239. And this one actually was an interesting one because it again, here, I'm going to give you the LA Times quote, because this is so absurd. LA Times wrote, California took a major step towards treating HIV as a public health issue, instead of treating those living with HIV as criminals. Now, criminals in our society are really the only ones left that are knowingly and endorsed segregation. We don't want criminals in our society. So when we have people that commit these heinous crimes, well, they need to be segregated. They need to put in an institution for them. These are the jails and the prison units, so on and so forth. I've never seen anything like that for anybody living with HIV, and I have known many people that live with it, that are dealing with it. I know people who, by the grace of God, have gotten better. I mean, but there's no HIV section at the back of the bus. They don't have to drink from HIV fountains. I mean, there is not this segregation and criminalization towards these people. You don't go to a doctor and the doctor says, about your test result, you tested positive for HIV, but before you leave, there's actually an officer outside of the room to come take you away. Having HIV is not a criminal offense, but what happened to cause the LA Times to want to state it this way was they decriminalized, the state of California decriminalized the knowing and willful withholding of information to a sexual partner that you have HIV positive. So knowingly transmitting a highly devastative and detrimental disease is now a misdemeanor. If I slap somebody in the face in California, it's a misdemeanor. If I break their jaw, it's felony assault and battery. Or, depending on the circumstance, aggravated assault. But if I give somebody AIDS without them knowing about it, it's about a $50 parking ticket equivalently. Oh, as is childhood prostitution. This, to me, is showing a pattern. We don't just need to be looking at the laws, but on top of the laws, we need to look at the intent of which these laws are promoting, and then go down to the people who are writing and endorsing said bills that are being turned into law. Because the next one we looked into was absolutely absurd. And this one was actually California Senate Bill 219, in which it criminalized. So something that was not a bad thing, might have been the equivalent of a parking ticket, but it is now a felony in which you could be fined $1,000 and or spend up to a year in prison to knowingly and willfully refuse to refer to a person living in an assisted living center, a nursing home, by their preferred gender pronoun. So we pointed out this complete absurdity that I'm hoping a lot of you are picking up on right now, where a person's feelings is literally more important than a person's physical well-being in the state of California. That's just exactly the way it is. These laws prove it. I don't have to give any other example other than a logical one that allows you to think for yourself. Now, this actually kind of spurred me into... those of you that know me or listen to this show, a lot of you do so because you were realizing there's something not right in the world. There's this collective consciousness all across the planet in which we as a human species, in the same way that the African and Indian elephants stomp the ground at approximately the same time every day, from continents apart, have this collective consciousness. The same is true for human beings. And we understand in our guts, in our spirit, that there is something not right in the world. Well, I didn't want to just leave it on, the way that we ended the last broadcast. I wanted to go into a little bit more depth because those of you that know there is something wrong with the world, and you have your friends that totally believe that everything is just hunky-dory, we've never been better, Trump's terrible, that he's going to cause the end of the world, he's a racist, fascist, misogynistic, terrible person. However, he was never called any of these names before he decided to run for president. So being in the public limelight and being even on television for many years, he was never called any of these names. It's not till he decides to run as a conservative. How interesting that the leftist media is now portraying him as a terrible person. But it did spur me into wanting to give people that pay attention to my show, to give them the information they need to be able to open other people's eyes that can realize there's something not right, but they don't know what it is. Y'all have seen it. Y'all, like me, you don't trust the government. You look at their actions and you judge and trust their actions that they make, not just what they're going to say and do, and then have this false ideology that all of their intentions are going to be in your best interest. So I wanted to give some really good examples, and this took me a while, I'll be honest with you. It took me a good bit of time to gather up the information because, as always, I like to give and will only give the information that I can prove. Because, again, I know things in the government are wrong. You know things in the government are wrong. But how do we educate those who don't know? We have to show them, prove them. We're all listening to this knowing it. However, how many of us or how many news agencies are giving you the platform, the information to directly give them the information that they cannot deny? There will be no speculation anytime one of you listeners tries to inform one of your dear friends or family or just a coworker that you care about, or just a human being on this planet that you don't want to see fallen in the cracks and then perpetuate the system that is destroying them in the same way. So, the broadcast today is specifically about a ability to prove 85 years, here we are, 2017, to be able to documentationally prove, factually prove, that for 85 years, the government has been funding the both experimental and intentional killing of U.S. citizens. And I want to start with the oldest, and it may not make a whole bunch of sense at the moment, but bear with me, folks, please do. In 1923, there was a goiter prevention program throughout the government that we have. And it was specific trying to understand why everybody was, getting goiter. And they couldn't figure it out. This was a medical issue. They had looked at it for many years. They finally came to the idea that there was a chance it could be iodine. So in 1923, they came to an agreement between the goiter prevention program and U.S. Morton Salt. We all know the salt company with the girl with the rainbow, or the umbrella, sorry folks. And they came together and decided they were going to be putting iodine directly into the salt. This sounds like it could be a good thing. And come to find out, after 10 years, they saw a 15-point IQ increase. They saw over an 80% decrease in goiter found in children. They found that the thyroid itself was functioning at optimal levels with increased iodine. And that was all done good and well. However, what ended up happening was in 1948. Let's backtrack. U.S. Morton Salt was putting in iodine at 100 milligrams per kilogram, which boiled down to approximately 500 individual units per day, according to the dosage instructions. So people were getting iodine, and it was benefiting them. And then in 1948, they lost all their funding, the goiter prevention program, for this act that they were doing, this program under them that they were enacting. And so what had happened was they lost funding, and because the government was no longer going to be fully supporting it, they allowed the iodine levels to be lowered to 48 milligrams per kilogram. So they knew it was good. They knew that you needed to have it. They knew it benefited you. But they turned around and took it away. If I know that anything is good for you and intentionally withhold it from you, that is not in your best interest. How interesting, at the same time, they came out and said that all pregnant women, from the time of conception, when they know that they're pregnant, should be taking iodine supplements every single day. Who is taught that anymore? I know I have 2 children of my own, and their mothers were never told that by the doctors. Not at all. And in fact, the doctors would tell the mothers more, for example, to take vitamin D3 supplements instead of telling them to go stand outside in a short sleeve shirt or get sun on their skin for about 15 minutes a day, because there's a photo response that happens with the epidermis of the human skin, in which the UVA and B lights that hit the skin from the sun actually causes the skin to produce its own vitamin D. So a lot of these deficiencies are actually generally caused by lack of something. And like vitamin D3, it's the lack of sunlight. Well, they knew it was happening, and they intentionally took it out. And again, this started in 1924, is when this project was initiated. However, in 1932, at the same time, there was what is known as the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. How interestingly enough, it was conducted by the United States Public Health Services. From 1932 to 1972, they stated that the purpose of the study was to observe the natural progression of untreated, think about that word. They're wanting to study the progression of something untreated. This means, by default, they have no intention of treating it. How else can they see the natural progression of untreated if they are treating it? So in 1932, they began this operation knowing that they were going to be studying the natural progression of untreated syphilis in rural African American men in Alabama under the guise of offering free health care from the United States government. What ended up happening is within 40 years, they had both directly and inadvertently affected over 60,000 African Americans with syphilis, with never having the intention to help them. Not once. And it was even in their guidelines when they started. Now to the iodine. I also stated that in 1948, they lowered the amount of iodine that people were being given. Well, at the same point in time, they started putting fluoride, another member of the halogen family on the periodic table of elements. They started putting fluoride into the water supply. How many things can you think of that require water for you to make? It's not just drinking a glass of water. It's not just having a cup of tea. It's your pasta. It's the bread. It's everything else that requires water for any sort of processing. Fluoride is being added to it. And they note, as per a Harvard study, directly found a link between fluoride and neurological developmental impedance. Also, the American Dental Association at the same point in time said that they have found, after many, many years of study, that there are 0 health benefits to fluoride. In fact, they have a dental condition called fluorosis. When your teeth receive too much fluoride, it is toxic. It's been toxic from the beginning. The concept of moderation is absurd. And then you have genetically modified organisms. They use concepts such as agrobacterial. They use virus-induced gene silencing. I'll give you a perfect example. They took the barley stripe mosaic virus, altered it, sent it in to eat the DNA strand of this wheat plant that they were creating. And it was supposed to get rid of the sections in the DNA that caused the plant to be, susceptible to certain things and impeded growth rate and so on and so forth. And a researcher by the name of Calgain figured out, apologies, not Calgain, but a researcher figured out in the developmental process that there were multiple sections in the human DNA strand that matched both the chemical shape and the protein synthesis or the protein makeup of certain sections of the DNA strand that was being attacked by the virus, and that it was actually having the same effect in the human DNA, causing different genes to be silenced. If you have a gene silenced, it could be 20 ingestions before it happens, it can be 1. But if you have a gene silenced, that's with you forever. That you will pass that trait on to your children if you have children after that point. This is something very scary. What are they going to turn off? What will it turn off? This is just one example of genetically modified organisms operating at their peak potential of destruction. However, the one of these articles that really got me into this pursuance of this episode is in July of 1995, under the Clinton administration. The United States Department of Energy released an article titled Human Radiation Experiments. Think about that. For those of you who might want to look into this, you need to go to Google, type in DOE for Department of Energy, /EH, space 0491. It will be the third Google result, as long as they don't change their algorithms and try to bury this article. But this will take you directly to the government's own webpage. It is a .gov site, and they will show you the entire article. However, they don't want to tell you that it went on for as long as it did. In this experiment, they took thousands of people, and through means of injection, insufflation, which means to breathe it, or ingestion via water, they would inject and administer radioactive isotopes, known radioactive particles, and some of the experiments, they would just blast them with X-ray radiation to see what happened. Some of these people died fast. Some of these people died slow. They videotaped a lot of these things. They documented it in some really egregious manners. All in the sake of science, they were willing to do these experiments on humans. And I'm not saying that it's going to be better to do it on an animal. Anytime you knowingly experiment in a lethal form on a living being, that is egregious. That this is the kind of thing that breeds serial killers. Like they always say, most of them start by hurting small animals and then move on to people. These are people that are they're knowingly irradiating you through an injection. I'll give you another example. I believe it was the Argonne Institute. I could be wrong on that, and I don't have an ability to look it up at this moment, but I believe it was the Argonne Institute that administered injections of radioactive iron to pregnant women to study the detrimental effects of neurological and physiological developments on an embryo. They knew it was going to hurt the child. They knew it was going to hurt the mother and did it anyway just so that they could see how it happened, what exactly happened. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can listen to anything that I had to say, Believe it or not, look it up. I've told you how to. But if you can listen to any of this and tell me that when they've been doing these things for over 85 years to this day, and then showing you some of these other examples of how they don't have your best interest, can you really say that the government is 100% for you? Or can we not start to realize that the government believes that we are 100% for them? And they are taking our own lives, our own health, our own children and families into their hands and doing with as they please. And this is not what it means to live in a free society. The worst part about it is when they release said information like this, nobody will talk about it. However, we'll talk daily about Harvey Weinstein and the Las Vegas shooting. And yes, these were extremely egregious things, but the Las Vegas shooting timelines and information doesn't add up, and nobody's getting to the real answers to the real questions. Harvey Weinstein is just becoming this debacle where it feels like there's about to be some other people come out and the left is just going to virtue signal saying, well, we took care of all these bad guys, and yeah, Trump's a bad guy too, so you got to trust us because we're attacking our own. It's manipulation by the government, folks. I mean, you've got to pay attention to it. Look into these things, please. I implore you, educate yourself to make a conscious decision in your own life. This has been Aaron Jenkins, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, so much. God bless the world, and God bless USA.